A little over a year ago, I was scrolling through Netflix trying to find something to watch. It was one of those evenings where I wasn't sure what I did want to watch, I only knew what didn't appeal. And what didn't appeal was any of my usual preferences fantasy, action, musicals, nothing. Then, and I don't remember how, Godzilla Minus One popped up, and I stayed on the title just long enough for the trailer to play. It looked interesting. Monster movies aren't generally my thing. I am very much a wimp in terms of monsters, spooks, and scares, but I decided to give it a try. After all, Godzilla is a franchise that's known worldwide and has lasted since the 1950s. There's gotta be something good there, right? So I settled in, hand on the remote, just in case it got too spooky and I had to turn it off. I was hooked. Almost as soon as the end credits began to roll, I was searching Netflix and every other streaming platform I subscribe to for more Godzilla movies. I very quickly found 2014's Godzilla and turned it on. I was less than impressed. But it got me thinking, because analyzing stories is what I do, about why I liked one but not the other. Welcome back to the Mightier Pen, where I share narrative tips for the story-driven DM. I'm Kate, an editor by trade, a writer by hobby, and a DM by default. Today we're stealing from fiction as we talk about Godzilla and how to make mega monsters work in your campaign. Giant monsters are a staple in D&D, and there's no shortage of homebrewed stat blocks adapting Godzilla for your game. But what about the less technical and more narrative side of things? What does a Godzilla-like monster look like outside of combat? How do you use one in your story? What can you pull from this massive franchise and add to your table? Let's start at the beginning, with the film that sparked a record-holding franchise. The year is 1954. Far off in the Pacific Ocean, just north of the Marshall Islands, the United States was using the Bikini Atoll as a testing ground for nuclear experiments. On March 4th, at 6:45 local time, they detonated their latest experiment, Castle Bravo. In mere moments, a fireball 4.5 miles in diameter formed, visible from over 250 miles away. A mushroom cloud quickly followed, 7 miles across in 1 minute, 62 miles across in 10 minutes, expanding at a rapid 360 miles per hour. Over 7,000 square miles of the surrounding ocean would be contaminated. The artificial island the bomb detonated on was left with a crater 6,500 feet across and 250 feet deep. That was not the intended result. In fact, it was nearly 3 times as powerful as the intended result. Without getting into the science involved, which I understand very little of, the different types of lithium used reacted in ways that the scientists hadn't predicted. But the explosion was only the beginning of the unexpected outcomes. Nearby islands and atolls were quickly evacuated, but in the coming years they would be deemed unlivable, as returning citizens found the landscape impacted in horrible ways and food sources destroyed or dangerous to consume. A Japanese fishing boat was also caught in the aftermath. The 23 crew members all fell ill, one dying of complications in the coming months, and their catch was entirely contaminated, sparking widespread panic at the thought of those even outside the affected area falling ill due to radiation spread through food. By August of the following year, an anti-nuclear petition gained over 30 million signatures, which was unsurprising given that this was less than a decade after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And artists, as they are so often inspired to do, created. On October 27th, nearly 9 months after the Castle Bravo detonation, a movie called Godzilla premiered in Nagoya, Japan, with a nationwide release following a week later. Its opening scene, depicting a fishing vessel caught in the fallout of a nuclear detonation at sea, was a direct reference to the events earlier in the year. While critical reviews were mixed, the film set records in its opening box office sales and soon reached international audiences to great success. Considered by many to be the blueprint of a successful monster movie, the film kicked off a franchise that spans more time than any other, containing 38 movies and countless series, books, video games, toys, and other media. Now, just to be clear, I have not watched that movie. Instead, I've watched two of the more recent entries in the franchise, 2023's Godzilla -1 and 2014's Godzilla. So they are going to be my examples of what to do and what not to do when using a mega monster in your campaign. Godzilla -1 follows a Japanese pilot in World War II. After barely surviving an island encounter with a mysterious monster, he returns home and begins to rebuild his life from the scattered pieces. He scrapes by, working on a boat, searching out abandoned mines in the aftermath of the war's end, and caring for the patchwork family that he forms. He and his ragtag crew are eventually drawn into the fight against Godzilla, the very same monster from the beginning of the movie, now mutated by radiation to become even more powerful. I think part of the reason I liked this movie so much was that it felt like a D&D game. A group of unlikely heroes banding together to face a larger-than-life threat, using their wits and creativity to win the day. 2014's Godzilla follows a U.S. naval officer on a journey to reunite with his family. They all end up caught in the middle of a three-way monster battle, or 2-on-1. A giant moth monster escapes containment, which wakes up Godzilla in the depths of the ocean. Godzilla starts chasing the moth monster down while it's seeking out the third monster, another moth monster, which it wants to reproduce with. In the end, the hero joins forces with Godzilla to defeat the moth monsters, and Godzilla returns to the sea, presumably to hibernate until another threat arises. In a lot of ways, these movies are a lot alike. So why did I like one more than the other? I think a large part of it came down to the focus of the story. Godzilla -1 is a story of guilt, family, and finding the strength to move on after losing nearly everything, with the monster nearly a passing thought. 2014's Godzilla is an action-packed story of hunting down a monster, with the plots around family and the lengths to which science will go being more secondary. And weirdly enough, I think the movie that focuses on Godzilla less is a better story. The monster isn't the focal point. Instead, it's a catalyst. It forces characters into situations that test their strength and will, making them face their inner demons and overcome obstacles. So, let's jump into a more detailed analysis of what worked or didn't in these movies, and how you can adapt those mindsets and tactics to your tabletop game. 1. Scale of story. Godzilla is a mega monster, and so any story involving it becomes one of widespread destruction. But while such a large scale might seem like an obvious way to create high stakes, a certain amount of small-scale storytelling is still necessary. A lot of stories capitalize on this concept. If you want to tug on someone's heartstrings, if you want to resonate with your audience, focus on something small. You can absolutely use wide-scale destruction, massive disasters, or mega monsters, but find a single point of view, a small piece of tragedy to share with the players. A village destroyed is heartbreaking, yes, but abstract in a lot of ways. But a pair of people who have died in each other's arms, perhaps trying to shield each other from inevitable death, that's a concrete detail, a story in untold moments, which will stick with the people who find them. 2. Use of mega monsters. I was honestly shocked to find in the course of researching this episode that only a handful of Godzilla movies show said monster for more than 20 minutes, and I don't think any have hit the 30-minute mark. The 1954 original actually spends very little time with the monster. The titular creature is only on screen for about 9 minutes out of 96. Both the 1954 and 2023 movies focus more on the ripple effects of the monster's presence, and the frantic way people try to prepare with or deal with the monster attacks. But the battle doesn't end when the monster's dead. It had an effect on the land that it ruined and the people it displaced. It caused a panic in people who were suddenly faced with a danger they couldn't understand or contain. So don't ignore the other effects of a mega monster besides the obvious rampage. 3. Symbolism and allegory. Godzilla is famously an allegory for the hydrogen bomb, for the utter devastation it rained down on Japan in World War II. Don't be afraid to play around with symbolism in your game, but if you do, remember the lesson we learned with scale. Big is fine, but don't forget the power of small. For example, in Godzilla -1, Godzilla is, as always, a symbol of destruction. However, on a smaller scale, it's also a symbol of the main character's guilt. He was meant to die years earlier, but through what many consider cowardly actions, he lived. He's left to wrestle with survivor's guilt and to struggle with his sense of self-worth. Of course, when he finally finds a sense of peace and happiness, uneasy as they might be, that's when the monster rears its head. Symbols and allegories can be layered. So what might the monster in your game represent, both generally and to your players? A shattered sense of safety, their own mortality and weakness? But a warning to you, don't belabor the point. Let your players draw conclusions. You don't have to spoon feed them your every intention. Sometimes it's just enough that you know what the symbolism is, as it will shape how you run things. Your players might not catch every nuance, but they'll still feel the effects. 4. How a monster behaves. I think the thing that frustrated me the most about 2014's Godzilla was how the monster acted. Godzilla was snoozing away underwater, long since mutated by radiation, but seemingly content to stay out of sight. But then a moth monster hatched, which somehow activated Godzilla's super senses, and it started hunting down the moth monster, which was only trying to find its mate. The chase spans oceans, islands, and countries, but the moment the moth monsters are gone, Godzilla is docile again, heading back to its underwater lair. One of my favorite resources is Keith Amon's blog and book, The Monsters Know What They're Doing. They're both full of advice for running monsters and opponents in realistic ways. After all, not everyone is going to be willing to fight to the death. Even when I can't find the exact monster in those resources, they've still served as reminders to think critically about why creatures and people act the way they do. An animal, no matter how large or small, is driven by very basic urges. If it's hungry, it eats. If it's given the safe opportunity to reproduce, it will. If it's hurt, it will lash out or retreat. So think about what drives your mega monster. How will it react to someone getting in its way? How long is it willing to risk its safety before retreating to recover? 5. Victory conditions. With a larger-than-life monster, victory might look a little different than a normal combat encounter. Maybe beating the monster means leading it away from a vulnerable town, chasing it off, or trapping it somehow. If your players are hopelessly outclassed, consider giving the monster a weakness. If they discover it, they can exploit it. I'm all about creative problem solving, which again is why I enjoyed Godzilla -1 so much. When faced with a monster that was essentially impervious to firepower, they got creative. They deployed devices which sank Godzilla to the bottom of the ocean, counting on the rapid change of pressure to do what their guns couldn't. And even if the monster survived the descent, the secondary feature of the devices would float the target up just as rapidly, subjecting whatever was caught in it to equally rapid decompression. I personally have found it much more rewarding to encourage creativity in my players. Let them think outside the box. It might not be the solution you had in mind, but that doesn't make it wrong. In my experience, collaboration with your players is what makes the game truly come to life. Let me know in the comments, how do you handle larger-than-life monsters at your table? I'm Kate, and this has been the Mightier Pen. Keep honing those storytelling skills, and may your next monster wreak havoc on all your unsuspecting NPCs.